Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit. I'm here to ask and answer one simple question. WTF is Flashback? Well, the original Flashback came out a long time ago in 1993, as you can see on the screen right there. It was a game that I played when I was a kid. And it was great. It was damn hard, but it was great. It was something, I wouldn't even say of a game that defined a genre, but definitely it was a paradigm shift in the way that games were presented alongside things like Prince of Persia and Another World, also known as Out of This World in other countries. It was really, really great 2D action adventure. And then we have the remake, which is interesting. And it is definitely a remake. It is most assuredly not just an HD version of the original. They actually have the original right here. I'm going to have a look at it a little bit later. But this involves most of the original team from Flashback in 1993, so it was interesting to see how they would update things. Now, this did originally come out on Xbox 360 during the Summer of Arcade, and then the exclusivity period expired and it ended up on PC. And it is brought to you by Ubisoft. Before I start, I should make you aware, by the way, if you're the kind of person that is not too into having too much DRM on his game, then you will find that even the Steam version does require Uplay in order to run. So there are, in fact, 2 layers of DRM on top of this, which may very well, understandably so, annoy the hell out of you. Alright, let's have a look at the options menu. So we have fully rebindable keys here, and it seems like the game was actually kind of designed for the keyboard and mouse, which makes sense considering the original game was played with the keyboard. And it was played perfectly fine. This time around, of course, there have been some changes which involve more analog motion, particularly with the gun, but for the most part, some of these controls should be fairly familiar to you. The inventory screen that you had previously is pretty much disappeared for the most part, and that means that the amount of items that you can collect are a little bit more limited. So if we have a look at the settings here, you'll notice it's got TV settings, which is a very strange thing to have in a PC version. I have no idea. You know, it's like soft, lucent vibe. These are not real things. These are made up for consoles. I don't understand them. Subtitles, vibration. Yeah, we don't need that. Thank you very much. So, standard sliders otherwise. Yes, I would love to. That would be great. Graphics options are limited, to say the least. You've got your resolution there, full screen on or off, VSync on or off, and then graphics quality settings, which include 4 presets, which is definitely not enough, I would say. It does, of course, run absolutely fine on my machine at 120 FPS. There don't appear to be any performance problems at all. And then you've got the assistance menu. Now, this is an interesting one to put in there, simply because a lot of this stuff, if you're maybe a hardcore Flashback fan, you're not going to want on. Like objectives, climbing icons, target autolock. I turned that off. I left the aiming laser on because if you turn that off, it gets very, very awkward. The game actually has analog aiming, which did not occur in the original Flashback, so having the aiming laser is kind of required. Throwing trajectory wasn't in the original either, and then I've got damage display off because I didn't feel that was necessary. So it's really up to you as to what you actually want to select here. Full mouse control in the menus is always appreciated, which it does certainly have. It's got leaderboards and achievements and all that kind of stuff. But aside from that, the meat of the game is the single-player campaign. There was no multiplayer here whatsoever. So, what's the objective of this video? Well, firstly, to give my first impressions of this title about an hour or so in. Secondly, to try and compare it to the 1993 version, which, unusually enough, we actually have access to and we can play. So, I'm going to try and judge it on its own merits, but I'm also going to do some comparison a little bit later on. Because the comparison is not really relevant to people that haven't played the original Flashback. And aside from that, we should certainly take the game on its own merits. So let us begin. It's a bit difficult to do that, of course, considering that I played so much Flashback when I was younger. Funnily enough, I never beat it. I got to the last room, the very last room, and ran out of time. And I died and couldn't be asked to do it again because the checkpoint was all the way back at the start of the level. So I never actually beat Flashback, even though I was a couple of seconds away from having done it. Interesting. Alright, here we go. On to level 3, shall we? Which is technically not level 3. What it means is actually your character is level 3. Yes, they put a level up system in the game for some reason. I don't really know why. Alright, so you may recognize this fellow. He goes by the name of Conrad, and he is the protagonist of Flashback. And unfortunately, it would appear that he has lost the ability to have really cool rotoscoped animations. In fact, his animations are derpy to say the least, as you can see. That was the first and biggest difference I saw with the game, because the animation style of Flashback, which you'll see a little bit later when I play the 1993 version for you, is extremely unique. Yeah? There are only a couple of games that really use that kind of rotoscoping, and Prince of Persia was one of them, and then, of course, Out of This World / Another World. Of course, this time around, you got your polygon models and your 2.5D setup. Now, I've got to say, the actual 2.5D setup is actually pretty damn impressive. It's a very, very nice looking 2.5D game. For the most part, the stuff that's in the foreground does not obscure the stuff that's in the background, except when you know that you're not necessarily going to be fighting. Unfortunately, that's not really a lot of the actual game. There's a lot of fighting involved, one way or the other. Something you have to consider is that they decided to throw an awful lot more battles into this game. And they seem to do so with respawning enemies in some areas. So you will be fighting drones that will pop up to try and kill you. They're not really a challenge by any stretch of the imagination, but they are there, and it's like, hey, you can fight. You really should fight. You know what would be great? Some fighting. Here's some more fighting. Now, I've got to say that the original Flashback actually limited the amount of fighting that you did, but again, I don't really want to focus on that too much. I'd rather talk about that during the actual Flashback 1993 section of this video. What I would like to actually talk to you about is how good this game is on its own. So, as it stands, let's ignore the fact that Flashback ever existed, yeah? Let's just throw the 1993 version out the window. Let's look at this from the perspective of someone that's never played Flashback and is just looking at this game as a 2.5D action-adventure. Would I say it's any good? I would say that it is mostly competent. Yeah? I don't think that without the legacy of Flashback, you would be seeing an awful lot of people getting excited about this game. So, why? Well, for one thing, the platforming is basic to say the least, and is going to confuse an awful lot of people, honestly. It really is. It's going to confuse people because it's a throwback to the original game in the way that it works. So, some people are going to find it very clunky. Personally, I find the nostalgia pretty cool, but most will find it, I would imagine, very, very clunky. The weird fact that you sort of turn to the side in order to talk to anything is a throwback to that game as well. But the platforming is definitely uninspired for a newer title, and I think that's going to bother a lot of people. The second problem I've got with it is the fact that the combat, in general, is just not that great. You've got this basic aiming system, as you can see, which you would otherwise use the analog stick for, but use the mouse here, which it works perfectly fine with the aiming laser and things like that. And you've got infinite rounds because that's just the way Flashback actually works. And you can increase your firing speed as well through a level up system. And you also unlock upgrades for your guns like that. Yeah? So let's have a look at the upgrades and things that are available here. This inventory screen here is not really that important. It's not the same as the inventory screen in the original Flashback, where more often than not you would get incidental items which you'd then have to use. Most of that stuff's just kind of permanent upgrades here. So your molecular glass is a separate key. Your force field, which comes back from the original Flashback, is a separate thing. But again, I keep going back to the original Flashback and not actually telling you what this stuff actually does. The force field is a very quick kind of defensive mechanism. You can put it up for about a second and it will absorb a shot, and you can do it a couple of times before it actually has to recharge. Aside from that, you do have a basic shield, which is also going to absorb some damage, and you can upgrade that, I believe, by upgrading your stamina and things like that. So there are these 3 stats that you can upgrade. I've put all of mine into accuracy, and as you can see, for the most part, you can do a decent amount with it, and it will increase a bunch of basic skills. You've then also got your upgrades here for grenade, stimpack, force field, stimpack just being your health, and then heavy shot and gun. So you can do a decent amount of stuff here as well. Aside from that, you also have a map, which is a welcome addition, I've got to say, and it works well too, because you've got this mini-map in the corner that will tell you where you want to go. Unfortunately, even though you have all of those upgrades and things like that, the level up system seems kind of pointless. Oh man, this is a throwback, but again, don't want to talk about that. Yes, okay. Yeah, it's just layer on the nostalgia there. That's going to annoy people, because like, well, why is that happening? Yeah. The combat, for the most part, just simply consists of shooting stuff, yeah? I think it takes a lot more... Oh, damn! I cannot do it. I am trying my best. I really am. I am trying my best to talk about this game without comparing it to the original Flashback. But what the hell do they expect me to do? The only reason this game exists is because the original Flashback exists. Yeah, the combat is just basic. Yeah, you don't have an awful lot of combat moves. You don't have the ability to roll or dodge out of the way. So you're basically relying on this shield right here and hopefully not getting shot too much. You move a little bit slower as you bring your gun out and you hold down the right mouse button to actually do that. And there are things like grenades that you have available to you as well. But the combat system is not inspired in any way. And usually that would be okay, but when we get onto 1993 a little later on, I'll explain why that doesn't really work so well here. Now, I've talked over the voice acting for the most part. I would love to wait for a cutscene so you can really get an experience of what the voice acting is actually like in this game. It is not great, frankly. It is cringeworthy at times, and they unironically use the word awesome sauce. Conrad's voice actor is not awesome, and it is compounded by the fact that the script is just dreadful. I have no idea who wrote this and thought it was a good idea, but the original Flashback actually had very little. I mean, it didn't really have voice acting. It had very little in terms of actual dialogue. It told the story through actions and these, for the most part, mute cutscenes. Every now and again, of course, there was some text involved in it, but for the most part, the cutscenes were silent. And they were very nicely animated for the time with a very unique style that you don't really see these days, but well, it wasn't exactly the most involved narrative experience. But you know what? It actually benefited from not being the most involved narrative experience. Now, the game does have a degree of exploration involved in it, but it really depends on the levels that you go to, yeah? The first level is very, very linear. This level is a hub for the most part. And then the next level, I know all this because I've played the original, will be, again, a fairly linear experience, and it will keep going on that, with the levels sort of gradually increasing in complexity, requiring some backtracking. I suppose these days you call it Metroidvania, but in those days you just called it Flashback. So, yeah, there you go. Yes, I went to the wrong station. Let's head on over to Europa, and we can go and do these missions. These restricted areas, for the most part, are a bunch of missions you'll have to do in order to earn enough credits to actually buy a false identity, which will then allow you to enter the Death Tower, because Conrad happens to have left some important information there, and he's lost his memory, so that can be a little bit unfortunate. Oh, that's so irritating. Every time you have to click on the station over and over again to kind of keep going. I want to go to Europa. I clicked Europa, it took me to Africa. It just takes you to each individual station, then you've got to use it again in order to get around there. Which, again, I think is just a little bit of nostalgia that they've kind of left in there. I suppose the problem that I really have with it is that without the nostalgic elements, this game doesn't really have a lot of value in and of itself. It is a reasonable action-adventure, but it doesn't have a lot else going for it. And that's really unfortunate. What is there compared to other games of their class? There's a lot of Metroidvania games out these days, and a lot of them are actually pretty damn good. I mean, if anything, I would be comparing this game to Shadow Complex on the Xbox 360, which is just much, much better, because it has a far superior combat system. So what exactly am I looking to do here, really? If I have never played Flashback before, there's no way in a million years I would recommend this game to that person. If I played the original Flashback, I'm most likely going to complain about the changes that they've made. It's not ideal, is it? And a lot of this stuff is a nostalgia trip. Like this setup right here. All these consoles and the way that it works, exactly the same as the original Flashback. The first level, loads of callbacks to the original Flashback. And it's very strange when you see these kind of remakes that are obviously trying to evoke the memory of the previous game, but are like, well, we need to modernize it in some way. But in doing so, they make the game duller. Oh, man. This bit of the game in particular is difficult to demo off, because I imagine a lot of you watching this are like, this looks really boring. It's like, it kind of is. It's only interesting to me because I know what's coming up next. That's the strange thing about nostalgia, isn't it? Really, really odd. Alright, we're gonna go pick up the parcel. And we'll probably get ambushed along the way, and we'll do some basic combat, and then that'll be that. There's a lot of running around doing errands for people, and to be fair, that was in the original as well. There was an awful lot of that. The entire second level is basically that. Alright, combat zone, okay. I wonder if they have any interesting platforming in some of this stuff.
I'm the new courier.
I've been waiting for you. You're late.
The only thing I'll ever be late for is my funeral.
It will be if you don't get this to the travel agency and the Africa station on time.
The high quality scripting. You have obnoxiously reached level 4. Here, grab some skills in things and such. I guess it's not really all that useful. Oh wow, there's not actually a way to subtract a skill point once you've added it, so you better be a little bit careful there. There we go. So we will just head out. We will probably encounter a drone and things like that. That's how the shield works, by the way, which is still a really cool mechanic from the original. I like that a lot. I don't think they necessarily needed all of those physics things going on with this game. That's not necessary. And I think if I've got any massive problem with it, it's like there's just a severe lack of difficulty. Like, in the original game, combat was a very considered thing. Here, it's spammy. It's more of a run-and-gun experience, which definitely doesn't fit with the overall vibe, in my opinion. Let's see if it'll actually take me to Africa Station here. Probably not. We'll see. Maybe I'll get lucky. Ah, there we go. Actually takes me to the right place for once. So I'll probably fight a couple more drones, maybe a couple more police on the way up here, and then that'll be it. There's just not a lot to it. There really isn't. And that's a shame. It could be a lot more than what it is. I feel you've got to do one of two things if you're going to remake a game. You've either got to be very faithful to it, or you've got to go in a completely different direction. Yeah. And this game sort of tried to straddle the two and failed at both, in my opinion.
Wait, you're a real person?
I've been hiding for years. I made a virtual copy of myself, and he's been training GBI agents for over a decade. You're the first student in the academy that I've approached in person.
Okay, but why me?
Because you're not afraid to break the rules. That gives you a free perspective. You see things most people cannot see.
You're trying to flatter me, is that it?
No, I'm trying to tell you that the world is in danger. We're being invaded and we don't even know it. They could be anyone. They can take any form.
What can? They who?
Put this module into your glasses and you'll see the world as it really is.
You gotta be kidding me. These things, what do they want? How do we stop them?
I call them morphs. I've created a virus, a neurophage. It attacks and breaks down their cellular structure. All that's left is to find the proper catalyst, and we can destroy them all.
Mission completed. You earn 100 credits.
I can't say that those cutscenes are particularly good either, quite frankly. Alright, let's have a look at the 1993 version, because I do really want to do some comparison stuff here. I feel that's probably the most valuable. Like, on its own, I can strongly suggest not picking up Flashback. If you have no experience of the 1993 version, do not pick this game up, because you're not going to get a lot out of it. Yeah? The only thing that I think is particularly strong is the aesthetic of the game. And I certainly wouldn't count the animations, because the animation quality is pretty poor. But the overall presentation of the world is very, very good. And the music and the sound, the little callbacks are pretty nice. However, this is where it all began. They allow you to play this on a little arcade machine in the corner, which is a little annoying. It would be nice if they actually, I suppose, scaled it, but really the game actually relies on its ratio. You cannot make it 16:9 without fundamentally breaking the game. So, these are the keys, awkward as they are. Do A, S, and D, P, K, O, and I. If I can remember this. Okay. Alright then. Here we go. The original Flashback by Delphine Software. So, let's give it a bash. This was the opening cutscene, by the way. which actually does not have music, and that is very much deliberate. Most of these scenes here really didn't, but you'll notice the style of animation, very, very unique. In fact, the style of animation in general, very unique. The intro for the remake of Flashback is a nice little callback to this, honestly. But yeah, it's a really, really cool opening. So what you do is you get shot down, and you end up landing in the jungle, and that's pretty much where you end up starting. And down he goes on the third shot. You've lost your memory completely. You can't find him. They think he's dead, and that's it. And you'll notice level there. You can actually put passwords in. So, here it is. This is the opening of Flashback, which opens up with that little scene right there. Code Banther, if you wish to go forward. And, oh, if by the way, you can instantly die. Welcome to games from 1993. You go the wrong way and do a dumb thing, you die. Yeah, this game, the remake does not let you do that, needless to say. So this is the original Flashback. The animation in this game is actually rather impressive, especially for its time, I have got to say. Now I've got to remember the key, because you actually have to press a key combination in order to actually do the platforming here. You hold down I, and that will make sure you hold on to the platforms in question. And that includes moving from screen to screen. Screens do not scroll in this game. They were individual screens that you had to then navigate. There we go. And every time you grab Nightmare, it gave you a nice little animation, which was pretty cool. It's not too shabby at all. I don't believe it's possible to get down here. No, it's not. Or is it? Be interesting if it was. No. No, I don't think so. I'm pretty sure you get through that area later. Graphically, it was impressive, too. The main character kind of lacks features, but it's the level of animation that's going on here. This weird uncanny valley feeling to everything. I mean, the way that things are animated in this game is very, very impressive. It really, really was. I mean, even the running, like the way that you turn, look at that. That, for the time, is impressive. I mean, that was kind of the thing which was happening before a lot of motion capture stuff, and really, when we got away from this style for the longest time, games just didn't look as good until we finally gained the technology to find a different way of doing it. Now, the platforming in this game was weird as well, because it was a very deliberate thing. You could do stuff like that, which was pretty cool. Holding up, of course, to grab onto something. You could then hang on something if you needed to. And doing a running jump, actually a bit of a pain in the ass. It required a set of key combinations in order to work correctly. So I have to do a running jump here in order to get over this bit. So what you'd do is you'd hold down I to run. You would tap the D button, and then you'd hold W. And that would do the jump. And you'd have to do that in kind of a fraction of a second, which was a little strange, to say the least. And then, of course, you had the combat, which involves me actually remembering the button to shoot. So, these nasty little drones here and there. Combat was very deliberate in this game because you could take 4 hits and then you would die. Yeah? You could recharge your shield at various points in the level, but took 4 hits, you're dead. Simple as that. And, of course, then you can die instantly from fall damage and things like that. But you'll notice that you move very slowly with your gun out because combat was a very deliberate, considered thing. Yeah? You had to take precise shots, and each enemy required different kinds of targeting in order to bring down. You didn't just spam your button like you do in the remake at drones. You had to aim at a precise time, as you saw right there. Speaking of precise timing, the platforming here is actually a little bit challenging because you had to run across the screen, and you had to be aware of the next screen that was coming along. I am not suggesting that they put that back in, because that is not a very good feature. That is outdated to say the least. Often having to do jumps before you even left the screen. But it's impressive, isn't it? It's very unusual. It's something we just don't see all that much anymore. At all. It's a very retro way of doing things. And there's also other stuff, like the ability to shoot an enemy off the screen if you knew where he was. And you had to be quick, too. You really, really did. So if I dropped down here, I had to immediately shoot, because otherwise that guy would shoot me in the head and do an awful lot of damage with a knockback there. So combat is considered. Combat is actually fairly tactical in the original Flashback, because you couldn't take that many hits, and you had to be very, very precise with your shots, and getting yourself into an awkward situation where you could be shot repeatedly, even with the invincibility frames that it gave you, meant that you would be in a nasty spot, and you could die very, very quickly. Now, you'll notice that all of this stuff, and just the pacing in general of the game, simply does not exist in the remake. And that is an interesting thing, to say the least. Now, there are ways of getting around this bit, incidentally. If you activate that little thing over there, which you can't actually jump from that distance. This is actually difficult, but I don't have to kill them. I mean, I don't necessarily have to kill them, but I put myself in a pretty awkward position here, as you can see. But everything was just slower. You spent longer on each screen, and you had to consider exactly what you were doing. You had to be very, very careful. And it got even more difficult the further on to the game you actually got, by the way. Can't hit him from here. I can hit him from here, though. Just melee him to death. There we go. Grab the cartridge. We do need that. It was a different time. And this game was designed for a slow, more methodical era. And you just don't get that in the remake. And that was the strength of Flashback. The story of Flashback is not the strength. No one remembers Conrad Hart anymore, and kind of rightfully so, because Conrad's journey was the big deal. It wasn't Conrad himself, because he didn't have really any character to him. He didn't have a voice actor. He didn't have dialogue. He was a guy that lost his memory, and that was kind of about it. But there was so much going on in this version, and it's not nostalgia when I say that this game is better than the remake, because it understood what it was. The remake has no idea what it wants to be. It's got a case of, I suppose, amnesia, ironically enough, and it's got an issue with its overall character. It may perhaps mistaken identity, or just a complete lack of ability to understand what exactly it was that made Flashback special. Gotta be careful here. Because you'll instantly die. Yep, this game was unforgiving. Gotta say, very much so. It's gonna start me right from the start again. You could die instantly here, which I gotta say is not great, but Flashback was unique at the end of the day. It was a game that was described as a classic, and I still believe is. It's very playable, even if it's dated. Very playable if you have the patience for it. I think you'll be rewarded by it greatly. There's a lot of challenges to be had in this game. It is not an easy game. However, the remake, on the other hand, no. I'm sorry. I cannot recommend it in all good conscience. Even if you enjoyed the original Flashback, there's some callbacks that are pretty cool, I gotta say, but it is not what I'm looking for today. It isn't. If I want a Metroidvania action-adventure, there are plenty more options that are better than this, even on the PC. And if I want a nostalgia trip, I'm not going to get it by them kind of taking the soul of Flashback and trying to adapt it for a modern era without an understanding of what made the game great in the first place. And that's kind of sad. It is kind of sad. Well, there you go, folks. Flashback, currently available on PC for $10, your regional equivalent. Not something I think I'll be playing too much more of, although, never know. Maybe I'll play more of the original. It was good for its time, and funnily enough, it still holds up in a strange way to this day. My name's been TotalBiscuit, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.